I asked my daughter, Danielle D'Souza Gill, to join because this next question actually pertains to incarceration, but it also pertains to her. Listen.
Hi, Dinesh. This is Grace. I've always wondered how you felt the moment that you realized you were going to have to serve prison or jail time or wherever it was that you ended up having to go for your sentence. Because I know that you're a dad and I'm a mom with children, and I cannot even imagine how that felt. I would love to hear your answer.
For sure. I'll kind of give it from my point of view, and then it'll be interesting. In fact, I don't know if I've even heard Danielle give it from her point of view. But, I was talking to my attorney, Ben Braffman, before the sentencing, and he was actually telling me that federal prison, this is, by the way, white-collar prison, he said, he was almost, I don't know if he was trying to cheer me up, but he's like, it's actually no big deal. He goes, first of all, he goes, you'll meet some very interesting people in there. He goes, you'll meet a mayor or two and a city alderman and some business guys and some salesmen. And he goes, and the facilities are actually quite good. He goes, you can play chess. He goes, they sometimes have a tennis court. There's, of course, television facilities. So he was giving me the idea that this would be almost like a little bit of quiet time for me. But one of the definite costs, and a very heavy one, is you have very little communication with the outside world. And here was Danielle, and she had just gotten into Dartmouth. I think she had finished her freshman year. And so my communication with her would have been limited to none for the duration, which could be, 6 months, a year. My sentence could have been up to 2 years, although that would have been perhaps a little unlikely. And so I got the other alternative, which was the confinement center, which has, that has criminals of every stripe, not just white collar, but blue collar guys. I mean, coyotes, drug smugglers, people who were in there for rape, typically people at the end of their sentence who were about to be released. But nevertheless, it was a far more, let's say, mixed crowd. But the good news was that I got out in the day. I'd only stay overnight, check in at 7, check out typically at 6 or 6:30 in the morning. And that meant that our family communications were uninterrupted, at least uninterrupted for the most part. So that's my short account. I think in that sense, I was relieved that I got the confinement center instead of federal prison, because I think it would have been hard on me and obviously hard on family. How do you see all that? Because you lived through it just the way I did.
Yeah, I think it was a crazy time. It was literally so much happening. All of a sudden, the house was being checked by those people who raided the place to look through everything. Of course, before this, definitely wasn't expecting anything like that. And then, I would say my experience was kind of dual. It was partly when I was with you, and then partly when I was in college. So I guess I would say, at least for the college part, how it was really honestly just crazy. I don't know how else to describe it, because one of my professors called me out in front of my whole class, and he would call me little felon. And he would say we just saw this in the paper. We just saw this and that. And so I think that made me really tough in school, because a lot of the other kids never really had to deal with that. Sometimes you might have other students be rude to you, but I had more professors being rude to me. So I actually had a different professor I talked to about this issue, and he kind of scolded the other professor like that's kind of too far. I think in college that was difficult because I was very worried about it and I wasn't there. But then I think when I took an off term from school, I was able to be back. So I was able to drive you there and see what was happening. And I think we went the first day when you started, we drove there, and that was kind of scary because we didn't know what to expect.
Yeah, I think I was the most apprehensive the very first time, because I was walking into an environment that I knew would have been unlike any I had experienced before. I mean, try to imagine going into a facility and then they lock the doors and you're sort of locked inside, and you look around and you realize, wow, this is a whole different world that, quite honestly, I never thought I would have any experience with. Mm-hmm. But I think you're making the point that there's a way in which you come out not only mentally, not only psychologically, but even spiritually stronger, because you see that you've sort of been in it and you've endured it, and you you've emerged. I wouldn't say unscathed, but in some ways stronger.
No, definitely. I mean, I just felt like, those professors were so rude. I didn't care about them. I think I was mostly worried about you being there, especially at the beginning, because we weren't, again, like sure what it was going to be like. And you had your confinement outfit. He'd wear normal clothes when he would, be at home. But then when you go to the confinement center, he'd wear kind of this like, like he didn't want to draw attention. So he wouldn't go looking like Professor Dinesh here. He would go dressed in a hoodie, and he kind of had his alternate clothing. So that was kind of strange. And then I think, he had a little Christmas show. He used to do this community service, teaching English to people. So when they did their little Christmas thing, he had to wear the little Christmas hat. So I remember going to that and being like, yeah, go, class, go team Dinesh.
Part of the craziness of these confinement people is that the bureaucrats behind the desk are like robots. And so even though I would have this community service and I would have an extended time outside of confinement because I was teaching a class, the class would typically end at 9 p.m., but in the summer, no class. And so I show up at my usual sign-in time, 7 p.m. to check in, and they're like, what are you doing here? I'm like, well, see, the class is out of session. They don't have it in the summer. So instead of coming in at 9 as normal, I'm coming in at 7 because I don't have class. The guy's like, well, it says right here you're supposed to come in at 9. So because I realize I'm dealing with a robot. There's no point trying to explain. There's no mind. You're talking to a wall. And so I'm like, what do you want me to do? They're like, come back at 9. So I basically went to the local Starbucks and sort of had a venti latte. Came back 2 hours later after doing some reading because I realized I'm dealing with complete robots and surviving in that environment takes a certain set of skills. And now I have them.
Yeah. And I think the craziest time was the unknown time, the time when there was a trial, the time when we didn't really know what was going to happen. But I think once we knew what it was and once the system was kind of started, the routine, and we knew what that was like, that was a little bit better. Because even though, of course, it was horrible that you had to go there at all, be in the confinement center, do all the community service, do the psychological testing, all of that was crazy. But I think the court time was a crazy time because, the judge had it out for you, and I just wasn't sure what was going to happen.
Well, this is the lesson of it all, looking back. Do not put your fate in the hands of bad people who can then do their will with you. So I realized, looking back, that I should have steered clear of all this and instead of letting them put a target on my back. But unfortunately, I was not cautious about it. I didn't know you, Honey Debbie, at the time. Debbie ran a pack. She would have given me the red alert, don't do this. But happily, having done it, I came through with it, not only okay, but in some ways better than ever.